thank you so much for being with us, Sandra. I know that I've met you through Jasmine, who's also given us an interview today, and Luis, who is my co-founder of Spirit Fire. And, your work on the review board is something that Luis and I really admire. And we thought that it would be a really nice way to introduce people just a little bit to the review board. We'll be going into those much more in depth with our full conference. But we wanted people to have a sense of the kind of people who are on a review board. So let me just say that the review boards mean so much to survivors because keeping the churches safe from predators, as well as the priesthood safe from predators, essentially makes it morally possible for me to come back as a Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very close to my heart. Could you tell us a little bit, Sandra, about what are the credentials that you bring to the review board, and also just your experience of being a Catholic?
Yes, so I'm an attorney, and my specialty is family law. And as a family law practitioner, I represent children and adults in child protective cases. So I'm very familiar with victim children, and also with parents and adults accused of perpetrating sexual abuse and other forms of abuse and neglect. I also represent families in custody, visitation cases, and so on. As far as, so that's pretty much my experience. And then as a Catholic, cradle Catholic, however, I had my years in college where I was not practicing. And I would say about 30 years ago, the birth of my daughter, and isn't that usually the case? You have children and you go back. So the birth of my daughter, I started coming back to church, and even though I wasn't practicing as I should, even when I was in college, I always read a lot, and I continued to read the Bible. And so when I came back to church, it was very easy. And then a few years later, we got news about priests that had sexually abused children. It was all over the news.
About when was that? When was that date? Because we're trying to place everyone's experience by, was it in the 80s and 90s when those first cases started to come out?
I believe it was in the 90s.
Okay.
When I first really heard about it. I believe in the 80s you heard about some cases, but I think it was in the 90s where it really blew up.
That's right.
And then there was the creation of the College of Bishops with the
charter.
Yes, the charter.
And that puts us right in 2001, which is when Spotlight broke in Boston, and the Catholic U.S., at least the U.S. Catholic bishops met and passed the charter, which really created the review board.
Exactly.
And by then you were just back in the church doing your thing and being an attorney. And what was it like then? Was it a sense that, okay, this was going to be taken care of? What was the experience as a Catholic who'd been seeing this?
So there was a sense that it was being taken care of, and that's what one hoped for. That's what I hoped for.
Yeah.
Being taken care of. And as I always say to everyone, I'm not Catholic because of the clergy. I'm not Catholic because of I'm not even Catholic because of the Pope. I'm Catholic because I strongly believe that this is the community that Jesus Christ established.
Mm-hmm.
And where else do I get the body and blood of Christ?
Yeah. Yeah. Which
And
is also what brings a lot of survivors home. You know,
right,
it's
exactly,
it's like a homing call. Yeah. And
exactly.
after Spotlight, after the charter was passed, the charter that created review boards, and for people who are watching this, I'm referring to the Charter for the Protection of Children and Young People, which was passed by the United States bishops at the United States Bishop Conference, which outlined both the child protection programs that were implemented over 10 years, that designed or called for pastoral care for survivors, but also designed something called a review board to review allegations against priests, from a canonical and from a ministerial point of view.
Right.
So Sandra, so we're now heading into the 2000s, and you're not on the review board yet. You're still gaining all of your understanding of child protective services experientially. What was your impression? Did you think it got taken care of?
So right around that time, I was serving in my church, and I was asked as a volunteer. They had instituted Virtues,
Right.
which is a program for all volunteers and employees to be trained in protecting children, and recognize any recognize any
Signs and
inappropriate or any right or any abuse that may be going on, or any. And so, and it teaches you to acknowledge, to recognize, to report. And so I did the Virtues program, and as soon as that came out, it was mandated that everyone did it. And then I became a facilitator, where I then brought the workshop to the different parishes, but mainly to my own parish of St. Bartholomew in Queens. And from there, the director of Safe Environment Office at the Diocese of Brooklyn asked that, if I would be interested in joining the diocesan board, and I didn't even know it existed.
mm-hmm.
But when I learned that it existed, I was so happy and very honored. And I said, sure, not knowing what I was getting myself into.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say I've been on the board I would dare say about 8 years.
8 years.
Yeah,
Wow.
about approximately, yes.
And it's really powerful. And I'm emphasizing this for the listener, because I think review board members take it for granted how over time you've amassed understanding with the Virtues Child Protection Program, all the best practices in child protection, all of the expectations on modes of behavior for all employees of the church, all the volunteers of the church, as well as the priests. So there's a fairly clearly codified level of conduct that includes things that are not criminal, but says these are boundary violations that aren't suitable for in the Catholic setting. And so when you're looking at different cases, you've been really steeped in the idea of what child protection is about. It's not just a parallel to the court of law, which sometimes I think it gets lost in the mess of the press. I understand press isn't going to get that. Can you talk a little bit, Sandra, about, as a case comes in, I think people don't realize the painful deliberation, the in-depth kind of investigations that go into each and every case. I mean, you are so aware of, you have people's lives and reputations in your hands. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like and what people go through deliberating these things?
So you're correct in saying it's very painful. It's a very painful deliberation. And yes, there are people's lives that we are in that moment making decisions over. And it's the victim as well as the accused.
Yeah.
These are two individuals in most cases that each need to be heard. So a case would come in, oftentimes where we receive that case file, which is voluminous, hundreds of pages.
Yeah.
Long, a case file. Again, it's an in-depth investigation. We have an investigator, an independent investigator that interviews everyone, collateral interviews, and we then come to our meeting and we review the cases, and a decision isn't made there. That's the investigator is present, and we then have questions for the investigator, suggestions for the investigator, or requests of, that we need more information, or can you speak to this person, or can you ask these questions, and that we send off the investigator again, and then we meet again. We meet monthly, and we do not arrive at any decision, or we don't make a vote until, or we don't vote until we feel satisfied that we have all the information that we need, or at least as much information, because sometimes you can't get all the information.
Yeah.
That we have at least all the information that we are going to get.
Yeah. That you've exhausted all those possibilities.
Exactly. We've exhausted all the possibilities. And it's not until we've exhausted all the possibilities that then we move for a vote.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can deliberate sometimes a couple months in a row. I mean, it's really, people really push, you become a team or a collegial body, is my impression of review boards that I've encountered, where you're all of these specialists, interdisciplinary, psychologists, psychiatrists, legal professionals of all types, judges, attorneys, child protective services, even in particularly sexual abuse specialists.
Yes.
In all sorts of ways. And so you're all looking at it from different points of view.
Right.
And it can get very deep and very, very methodical.
So we're very fortunate. Our review board consists of psychologists, consists of retired, police captain, a commissioner, actually we have 3 attorneys from 3 different disciplinaries. We have also a nurse, a retired nurse, and we have a gentleman who's, I believe he's a licensed social worker who runs a program for perpetrators. And these are court mandated programs for sex abuse.
Yeah.
It's a year-long program.
Yeah.
And so I feel blessed to be surrounded by these professionals who all have, very valuable input.
Mm-hmm.
And we bounce off of each other. And it's not necessarily do we all agree all the time.
Right.
But
it's reassuring though, because I think what the most reassuring thing to me is as I meet people on review boards, is the level of privacy and confidentiality they afford the people who come before them, but also a sense of pride and honor in the role.
Yes.
And no sense that everybody needs to agree, that there's a benefit from not having that. You're not on a review board if you can't handle conflicting points of view. It just doesn't work. And the other thing I think is very powerful that Catholics are unaware of is over the years, a review board becomes a cohesive whole of unusual expertise, even in the world outside the church. So
Mm-hmm.
that it becomes sometimes a place that bishops have, or that, let's say, major superiors of different religious orders have, of just going in and asking advice about boundary violations. And you may hear in the course of the conference the idea of charter creep. But when it comes to your review board, you've created this cohesive, powerful, um, perceptive advisory group that can help you understand, as the world becomes more sexualized and violent, more things come in from society into the way the church itself helps people. So it's very powerful. Um, I guess there'd be, I just can't say enough about my regard for what you do, Sandra. And um, is there something that you would like people to understand beyond the idea of the pain of reading these cases after cases, and then the challenge of talking with each other? Um, do you have any other thoughts about just this role of the review board now that you know what it is, you're part of it, you see it over time? What do you wish Catholics knew that they might? Well, mostly nobody knows about review boards. So what would be something nice for them to know that we haven't mentioned?
I think that I think it would be nice to know that we are truly independent. We're not an arm of the diocese. We're not dependent. We're not trying to please anyone. We're trying to get to the bottom of things and make a just decision. We're not looking to, to decide any case and to let it go the way that we think, the bishop wants, or that's not, it is entirely up to us. We are entirely
Yeah,
independent.
excuse me, please. And the other, it rings a bell for me too, where with you all, um, both independent, and there's a sense that I'm going to have to edit this out because I'm trying to remember what we talked about, where
Impropriety, the
the idea of boundary, like where
yeah,
so also
appearance of impropriety. It doesn't have to be an actual act. If
right.
you have a clergy that just doesn't get it, it's not right. You should
Yeah.
not be there because of the boundaries. He doesn't get that this is not appropriate and that it is overstepping boundaries.
Well, and it's something that you said a little earlier as we were just chit-chatting, this idea that, it might not be a criminal offense, but it might be something a parent doesn't want around their child. And this is where you look at this idea of impropriety or patterns of behavior that could lead to something that later people would say you should have noticed. The review board will look at that kind of thing beyond what a criminal court would.
Oh, absolutely. So the wonderful thing about a review board is that we're not looking at the cases where the individual has been convicted. Those cases are done. And that priest, if it's a priest, is lay aside, it's done, it's over. The ministry, he's ripped off, all his ministry.
Yeah.
Now, these are the cases where they weren't prosecuted. And now we're looking at them, we're giving it another look. We're going to look at it and say, well, maybe there wasn't any criminal act here, but is it are the allegations substantiated? Are they, do we need to look forward? Do we need to make, what's the decision in this case? And one of the things that we do look at is the grooming.
Yeah.
So a lot of these, what may be an appearance of impropriety or overstepping boundaries is just really grooming. And we are all aware of that process. And just because maybe a certain individual clergy, let's say, didn't commit an act, didn't do the act, it doesn't mean that his actions would not lead up to that act, and it doesn't mean that his actions aren't unacceptable.
Mhm.
And I dare say that we have made decisions on, on just actions alone that have not been an outright violation of an individual, but has been inappropriate and unacceptable.
And that's why, so what your background is so wonderful, for example, not just understanding child protective services and how they approach removing children from homes as unsafe, but also in Virtus and in the best practices of how you keep children safe. These things have also been given to priests and employees of the church. So say it's not necessarily a priest, but it's a deacon or something. They've already been shown what not to do. So if they repeatedly break that with a boundary violation that won't land them in jail, the review board will painstakingly review whether that's just something stupid or whether it's something that's a repeated behavior that suggests grooming. And they're keeping in mind not just children and not just a priest who you want to keep innocent priests safe, but you're also keeping in mind what parents fairly expect for their children, So it's a really beautiful role you play. It's a difficult role. And I just thank you. I really thank you for your time too, because I gave Sandra very short notice, but she was so wonderful to talk. And I hope that people will see you again next year as we do our conference.
It would be my pleasure, and thank you very much.